For the first time in MLB history, two pitchers won Cy Young Awards in the same year after being teammates just the season before. Steve Cohen is off to a great start as Mets owner, and two pitchers have accepted their club's qualifying offer. Hello, everyone, and welcome into this Thursday, November 12th edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports. Due to technical difficulties, not streaming live today, but available on demand, as always, along with our other 110 shows on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, also YouTube, and on the website 110sportsmedia.com. Lot to get to you today on this show. We've had a lot of, actually, more than I expected storylines, a number of storylines over the last couple of days, including just a few minutes ago, the Angels apparently naming a new general manager. There was a search there, an extensive search for a new GM, and apparently they have reached a decision on that. So we'll talk about that coming up in news and notes. Also, a lot of other storylines for the past couple of days and unexpected news items. We'll get into that. Here's what you can expect on today's broadcast. We're going to return to our top four. That's something kind of got away from deeper into the postseason because really there was just a couple of key series to focus on. There was no need for a top four storyline sort of situation. Tuesday's show is pretty much just a sort of a catch-up show on some of the biggest storylines of the first few weeks of the offseason. But now as we start to get into a groove here and a rhythm, I think the top four will bring some good structure. So a number of different storylines I want to discuss today. We're going to talk about the recent awards that were handed out, Cy Young and Manager of the Year. We're talking about the Mets' new vision that's been laid out by Steve Cohen and Team President Sandy Alderson yesterday at their press conference. Actually, that was Tuesday. Also, the two players who accepted their club's qualifying offers and the four who didn't, and some of the latest hot stove reports and rumors about teams that are interested in certain players, the market for certain star players, and a star player who it looks like is going to be traded in the coming weeks or months. Also have some news and notes for you today, as always. Then today we're going to begin our off-season previews, going along with stories that we have up on the website, 110sportsmedia.com. We're going to be taking a look back at every team. Today in the AL East and NL East, we'll take a quick look back at their 2020 performance, and then a lot of a look ahead for them at the key questions they face this offseason, at the moves they've already made, at the needs they have this offseason. So it's sort of an offseason reset, a preview, if you will, of what the situation is for all these teams. So today the AL East and the NL East are on the docket. We'll finish things up with what's on deck. So let's go ahead and dive right in to our top four. And we have now Manager of the Year winners and Cy Young winners. On Tuesday's show, we talked about Devin Williams and the Mariners outfielder Kyle Lewis, forgetting his name there for a minute, the two of them being named Rookie of the Year. And then Tuesday night, we found out that for just the second time since Manager of the Year, that award debuted in 1983, both of the winners managed in the same state. The Rays' Kevin Cash and the Marlins' Don Mattingly were announced as the AL and NL Managers of the Year on Tuesday night. We'll start with Cash. He becomes just the second manager in Rays history to take home the honors, Joe Maddon being the other. He won twice. Cash, of course, leading the Rays to a 40-20 regular season record. They won the AL East for the first time since 2010. And they, of course, went on to clinch their franchise's second AL pennant before losing to the Dodgers, of course, in the World Series. Should note, though, that the ballots for this award were due before the postseason began. So this was truly just a reflection of regular season performance, and it was an outstanding regular season for the Rays, who finished with the best record in the American League. Indians manager Terry Francona, a good friend of Cash, who served as his manager in Boston and then later coached alongside him when Cash joined Francona's staff in Cleveland. Francona announced the award on MLB Network. Cash received 22 of the 30 first-placed votes for the award. Former White Sox manager Rick Renteria finished second in the balloting, and Blue Jays manager Charlie Montoyo finished third. Meanwhile, Mattingly led the Marlins to a highly improbable 2020 run as the club overcame a massive COVID-19 outbreak to reach the postseason for the first time since 2003. They ended up sweeping the Cubs in the wild card series to reach the NLDS, of course, after the voting was due. The ballots were due. Mattingly becomes just the third Miami manager to win the award after Jack McEwen in 2003 and Joe Girardi in 2006. There's no crazy take on this, no hot take on the situation. Both of those very logical decisions, very logical winners of those awards. Of course, when you have Mattingly leading the Marlins on this incredible, improbable run, and the Rays winning the American League, I mean, in the regular season, like going on to clinch the pennant eventually, there's very clearly, very sound logical choices for those awards. Meanwhile, in the Cy Young race, an interesting tidbit here. Before the 2020 season began, Trevor Bauer texted his former Indians teammate Shane Bieber to show him that the two had the same odds to win the Cy Young Award in 2020. Bieber said that he then told Bauer, "Why don't we go 2 for 2?" And guess what? That's exactly what happened. Bieber, the Indians' ace and former college walk-on, became the first unanimous winner of the AL Cy Young Award since Justin Verlander in 2011. And there was really no doubt at all that Bieber would end up being your AL Cy Young winner. His 1.69 ERA was the lowest for a qualifying AL starter since Major League Baseball lowered the mound back in 1969. That's incredible. It's the first time a Cleveland starting pitcher has won the Cy Young unanimously. It's the third time a Cleveland pitcher has won the award in the last 7 years, though, as Corey Kluber did it in 2014 and 2017. Bieber also won the Triple Crown this year for pitchers by leading the AL in wins, ERA, and strikeouts. He was the best pitcher in baseball this season, no doubt about it. He led the majors in strikeouts per 9, ERA, several other key statistics. Kenta Maeda of the Twins was the runner-up after an outstanding first season in Minnesota, after he'd been a Dodger for so long, and another former Dodger. Hyunjin Ryu, in his first season with the Blue Jays, finished third in the balloting after a great first season in Toronto, or with Toronto. They didn't play in Toronto in 2020. As for Bauer, the NL Cy Young race we all knew was a tighter race, though in the end Bauer ended up receiving 27 of the 31st place votes, so he ended up really easily distancing himself from second place finisher Yu Darvish of the Cubs and third place finisher Jacob deGrom of the Mets. Bauer posted an NL leading 1.73 ERA in 2020. It was spectacular. He became the first Reds pitcher to lead the league in ERA since 1944. He also posted a 0.80 whip and struck out 100 batters in 73 innings compared to just 17 walks. Trevor Bauer was sensational in 2020, absolutely deserved this award in terms of performance in 2020. He was my pick for the award, as was Shane Bieber. It was really an easy call. There was some thought that maybe, outstanding seasons from Yu Darvish and from Jacob deGrom, as we've come to expect with deGrom, who'd won the previous 2 Cy Young Awards in the National League. So both of them had a good case, and both of them, absolutely would have been deserving winners. But gotta hand it to Trevor Bauer in terms of his numbers in 2020. They were just sensational. He is the first Cy Young winner in the history of the Reds, the oldest franchise in Major League Baseball. It's their first ever Cy Young Award winner, which is incredible that it's taken all this time. Trevor Bauer, the first Red Cy Young winner. And Bauer appears to be in line to be the first free agent to switch teams after winning the Cy Young since Greg Maddux in 1992. Of course, Bauer hasn't ruled out a return to the Reds, but he is the number 1 free agent starting pitcher without a doubt this offseason. Seems highly likely he's going to end up elsewhere, which is not something that happens very often for the reigning Cy Young Award winner. And again, both these 2 picks make perfect sense. There's no, would be more fun for me to have a hot take on this, but there really isn't one necessary. These are the 2 most deserving winners in Major League Baseball for these awards. And that's our top 4 item number 1. Pretty straightforward. Second thing we're going to talk about today is this. The most competent the New York Mets have sounded in decades. That is how ESPN's Jeff Passan described the Sandy Alderson Steve Cohen press conference on Tuesday. And he's right. Cohen, the billionaire hedge fund manager who just purchased the Mets for more than $2.4 billion, and Alderson, the former Mets general manager rehired as team president, laid out a truly encouraging and exciting vision for the organization, one that's frankly made a fool of itself in various ways year after year with gaffe after gaffe. So a really encouraging vision laid out by that pair in their press conference on Tuesday. I touched on it a little bit at the end of our show, our broadcast on Tuesday. That press conference was underway, and I read you a couple of quotes from it, but I think it's really worth noting a few of the topics that Cohen touched on. When it comes to payroll, he said, I can promise you we're going to act like a major market team. Are we going to act like drunken sailors in the marketplace? No, we want to be thoughtful. You can spend a lot of money today and tie up your team for the next 5 years. On owning the Mets, Cohen said, I plan to make the investments we need to succeed. I'm not trying to make money here. Here it's about building something great, building something for the fans, winning. On the club's future, Cohen said, I'm trying to build a sustainable franchise. I don't want to be good 1 year and bad 3 years. I want to be good every year. Cohen also said he wants to upgrade in terms of embracing analytics in the franchise. He wants to emulate the Dodgers, which who doesn't? And he wants to emulate their farm system and the strategy they have in place there. He said he will not micromanage. He will let the front office personnel that he puts in place do their jobs, and stressed the importance of professionalism and integrity. Another important note from the press conference: when asked about the future of manager Luis Rojas, Cohen passed the questions to Alderson, and he said that Rojas is very likely to remain as Mets manager in 2021, but Alderson did leave the door open that the club's next president of baseball operations, who they haven't hired yet, could end up making their own call and could end up going a different direction, but it seems like that's probably not going to happen. It seems like Luis Rojas will remain most likely as Mets manager this upcoming year. And those are just some of the quotes, some of the notable things that Cohen said in this press conference, and how refreshing it was. And I cannot imagine how excited Mets fans must be right now to hear this from the franchise's owner, especially compared to, you have to kind of understand the context of the Mets. Number one, this is a team that has a good core of players, but there's just been this unwillingness to go out and be a little bold and make another move or two to get you to where you're really at that high level. And this is just a franchise that in recent years has been defined by all these embarrassing mistakes and things that just make you scratch your head and say, whoa, what are the Mets doing this time? Like, what happened this time? It's a lot of front office mistakes and just things that just drama that's just not, that's taking away from any potential success the team would be having. So it's been a mess. The Mets have been a mess. They have been that team in baseball that everyone looks to and says, well, there's potential there. And every year you think, oh, maybe this will be their year, but it's just a team that always finds a way, not even very much from an on-the-field perspective, as much as it is management and front office has just been a mess year after year. And so this very refreshing to hear from Cohen and Sandy Alderson. But the important thing to note here is we've heard the great words. We've heard these words that are great, but now it's time for the action to support it, and that is the truly hard part. It's step one. It's a good step one that we heard in Cohen saying all the right things and energizing this fan base and committing to winning and committing to spending, not recklessly like he said, but spending like a big market team. Now is the time when you have to start backing that up with action. And it's a tricky balance because if you're Cohen, you want to get right after it. Maybe you want to get active this offseason, put some money into some big moves. There's some big free agents that could really help the Mets. But, there's this pressure now that you said this, you need to start it. You need to start showing some evidence they're actually doing that. But you don't want to get too excited and try to do too much too fast. Otherwise, you fall into jeopardy of what he's talked about and where he doesn't want to get too excited, do too much, and all of a sudden, he wants sustainable success. So you can't get too excited, bring in all these free agents for all this, these top guys, top dollar, and then all of a sudden, a couple of years from now, it backfires on you. So it's an interesting balance he's got to strike where they've got to start doing something, but you don't want to get too excited and do too much too fast. It's a process. It's not something where you find out tomorrow that the Mets have signed JT Realmuto, DJ LeMahieu, and George Springer. Like, that's just, it doesn't happen like that. So we'll see what they do this offseason. I'm really excited to see, though, and interested to see with the Mets what they do this offseason, whether they go out and make a big splash with one or more of the top dollar free agents. And even if they don't, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of incremental moves. This is a team that has a great core, like I said, of players with DeGrom and Syndergaard and Pete Alonso, J.D. Davis, Dominic Smith. I mean, there's a whole bunch, Jeff McNeil. There's a whole bunch of exciting names on this Mets team. So they could decide to go for some mid-tier free agents this offseason and then really spend next offseason. There's a huge group of star players hitting the market, scheduled to hit the market in next offseason. So we'll see what they do. I'm going to be interested to see how that all plays out. Our next top four item actually ties into that a little bit because one player who was excited by Cohen's official introduction was starting pitcher Marcus Stroman, who did not throw a pitch for the Mets last season. He was on the Mets. He did not throw a pitch for the Mets last season due to an injury and then opting out due to COVID-19. And he was set to be one of the top free agent starting pitchers on the market this offseason. I had ranked him as the number 2 starting pitcher on the market on my free agent rankings and predictions story behind just Trevor Bauer. And he tweeted yesterday, though, that he has accepted the Mets' 1-year, $18.5 million qualifying offer. He tweeted, quote, "After watching the presser, I'm beyond excited to play for you, sir. I could feel the excitement and passion you're going to bring daily. Let's go, be great." And then tagging Steve Cohen in the tweet. So Marcus Stroman, seeing that press conference, obviously, I can't, if Cohen had gone out there and just said standard things and not said bad things, but not been so exciting, I mean, would Stroman have, I don't know how much weight to put on actually what Cohen said in Stroman's decision because there are plenty of reasons why it makes sense for him aside from just excitement about the Mets. But regardless of the situation, Marcus Stroman is back for the Mets in 2021, and that's a big thing for them because the 29-year-old, like I said, didn't pitch this past season, but he had a 3.22 ERA and 32 starts between Toronto and New York in 2019. And from his perspective, he gets a pretty good chunk of change, almost $19 million for 2021, a chance to have a strong season and then really get that long-term contract that he might not have been able to get this offseason given the market and that he hasn't pitched in a year. So he has a chance to really, have this year and then go search for that long-term deal. If you're the Mets, though, it's huge because one of their big problems, and we're going to talk about this coming up, one of their big problems in 2020, their biggest problem was they had no reliable starters behind Jacob deGrom in the rotation. Noah Syndergaard was out after Tommy John, and that's a big factor, and then Stroman didn't pitch. They expected him to be there. So it ended up being a disaster, the rotation, aside from deGrom. And so now you have Syndergaard coming back at some point early to mid-season next year with deGrom, and now with Stroman in the rotation. That's a big thing for the Mets, and we'll talk more about their situation coming up. Stroman was not the only player, though, that accepted a qualifying offer before the deadline to do so, which was yesterday. Kevin Gausman will be returning to the Giants in 2021 after a bounce-back 2020 season with a 3.62 ERA, 79 strikeouts to 16 walks in roughly 60 innings pitched. Another 4 players were extended qualifying offers, but then rejected them as you would expect. That's Trevor Bauer from the Reds, George Springer with the Astros, JT Realmuto with the Phillies, and DJ LeMahieu with the Yankees. 4 of the top, they may be the top 4 free agents, maybe 4 of the top 5, or just the top 4, I think, in my rankings. Free agents, they all rejected their qualifying offer extensions from their clubs as expected, and now the club that those players eventually sign with assuming it's not the same team they just came from, will eventually have to give up a draft pick. When they do so, that draft pick will go to the team the player just came from. And so that's our third top four item. Now it's time for the fourth top four item, which is just a handful of different hot stove rumors and reports, because it is that time of year. Of course, throughout the offseason, we're going to have a lot of signings, and we're going to have trades probably, and all these different things that are going to happen. But the lead up to it is a lot of rumors, and I shouldn't say rumors. These are legitimate reports from legitimate baseball reporters. But there's just all sorts of talk about, these teams are interested in those players, and you don't want to get too far into the weeds on it sometimes, but there have been a number of different reports from the last couple of days and weeks that I want to discuss a little bit about those situations. The first one here I want to discuss is a really notable one, because here's the quote: Francisco Lindor probably won't be a member of the Cleveland Indians by opening day. That is the first line of a recent report from MLB.com's John Morosi, who writes that it could take several weeks or longer for a trade to materialize, but he's hearing from multiple industry sources that the Indians are likely to trade the four-time All-Star shortstop, as was first reported by USA Today. The soon-to-be 27-year-old Lindor, he's going to be eligible for free agency after the 2021 season. So whatever team acquires him is only going to get 1 year of control before he would hit the free agent market, along with a number of top-tier shortstops next offseason. Morosi writes that the Mets, Yankees, Phillies, Blue Jays, and Cardinals are viewed as the strongest candidates to land Lindor. So this is going to be an interesting storyline to watch throughout the offseason. As far as those 5 teams that were mentioned by Morosi, the Mets, they have a couple of exciting young shortstops, but they could certainly use that offensive boost. They could package in 1 or 2 of those shortstops in a deal going back to the Indians for Lindor. And then maybe, if they decide Lindor is the guy they want to go after and believe in, then maybe they make that trade, and then they are confident in their ability to lock him up and spend that money to sign into a long-term deal. The Yankees, meanwhile, of course, they're always in the market for these big star players. They're always interested if they were to acquire Lindor, moving Gleyber Torres to second base, and then probably not re-signing DJ LeMahieu. The Phillies situation, they have Didi Gregorius leaving, so there's a hole at shortstop. They could fill it with Gene Segura, but that would be a huge addition for them. They need something happening, especially if JT Muto does not return. They got to get something going on, because the Phillies are in a tough spot right now. The Blue Jays have Bo Bichette at short, but they can move him to second or third base. He's expressed a willingness to do that, and they could obviously use the offensive boost. Meanwhile, the Cardinals have Paul DeJong at shortstop, but they've let Colton Wong go. They declined his options, so they could shift guys around to make room, and that would be a big bet for them, just as it would be for anybody who might acquire Lindor. So we'll keep an eye on that. And speaking of shortstops, Toronto, the Blue Jays, are showing an interest in free agent shortstop Andrelton Simmons, according to a recent report from the Canadian Baseball Network. So it appears, maybe these 2 reports sort of showing an indication that the Blue Jays are interested in adding a shortstop, maybe moving Bo Bichette to third base or something like that. There's a hole at third base for them, so that's a way they could solve that. So we'll see how that plays out. Agent Scott Boras told John Morosi on Tuesday that there is a great deal of interest in his client, free agent left-hander James Paxton. He was limited to just 5 starts this year with the Yankees due to a flexor strain, and he struggled when he was on the mound, but the 32-year-old's been a pretty reliable arm in terms of performance when he has been on the mound in his major league career. His market could be strong enough for a multi-year deal, but we could also see a 1-year bounce-back type of contract as well. At least 8 to 10 teams have expressed interest in veteran right-hander Charlie Morton, according to MLB.com's Mark Feinsand. He will turn 37 on Thursday. Morton will, and he's reportedly looking for a 1-year deal after Tampa Bay declined his 2021 option. He's considered one of the best starters on the market this offseason despite his age. He has been outstanding in his mid to late 30s, actually, and Morton only looking for a 1-year deal, so it only makes sense, honestly. There's got to be like 20 to 25 clubs where Morton would be an exciting addition. He's not going to be that high of a cost for 1 year, and the upside is very high. The Tigers are in search of a veteran starter this offseason, and they're one of the teams showing interest in Taijuan Walker, according to Morosi. Walker's coming off a bounce-back season that included a great September after he got traded to Toronto. He was outstanding down the stretch. Bob Nightingale of USA Today reports that rival teams fully expect the Rangers will trade Lance Lynn this winter, which begs the question, why, again, did they not trade him at this past trade deadline? But the 33-year-old has reached a whole new level in recent years. He's been incredibly durable, reliable, strikeout pitcher like he hadn't been before. He had a 3.32 ERA and 84 innings in 2020. That was the most innings pitched by any pitcher this past season. Finally, MLB Network's John Heyman reports that Yadier Molina, the free agent catcher and lifelong St. Louis Cardinal, has received calls with interest from the Yankees, the Mets, and 3 to 4 other teams. The Braves apparently are one of those other teams. The Cardinals are interested in bringing him back. Heyman calls them the likely favorite, and Molina is apparently seeking a 2-year contract. So we'll see how that plays out. You have to think again that the Cardinals are still the favorite to re-sign Molina, that's the only team he's ever known in the major leagues, he's ever been with, face of the franchise, but he's looking for a 2-year deal. He is, I believe, 39 years old at this point, so we'll see how that all plays out. And we're going to go ahead and take our first break of the show. Right after this, we'll come back with some news and notes, just a couple of items for you today, and then we'll begin our off-season preview segments with the AL East. That's coming up next here on Around the Bases from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to this Thursday, November 12th edition of Around the Bases here from 110 Sports, available on demand at 110sportsmedia.com, as well as in podcast form on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and on YouTube. On any of those platforms, just search for 110 Sports. Time to dive into some news and notes before we get to our off-season previews. And we're going to start with this. The Red Sox confirmed yesterday that Chris Sale will not be ready for the start of the 2021 season. That was pretty much a given after he underwent Tommy John surgery near the end of March. And late April of 2021 seems like a best-case scenario for Sale's return at this point in time. Right-hander Josh Tomlin is staying in Atlanta as the veteran agreed to a 1-year deal with the Braves that guarantees him $1.25 million. Tomlin's overall numbers for 2020 don't look all that great, but he had a 2.95 ERA in 12 relief appearances, a 6.33 ERA in 5 starts, so did do well in a bullpen role. Some positive news here. Legendary Dodgers broadcaster Vin Scully, who called games for the team for decades and decades before retiring in 2016, will narrate MLB's official 2020 World Series documentary. Scully saying in a statement, it was 32 years since the Dodgers won a World Series, and the 7th in the history of the organization, bringing great joy to the fans in the city of Los Angeles in particular. This is their winning story against the Tampa Bay Rays, and it's an honor for me to recount just how they did it. So that's going to be fun to see. In other news, former Giants outfielder Mac Williamson is suing the club after over a concussion that he suffered in 2018 that he says ultimately ended his playing career. Williamson is alleging negligence while seeking unspecified damages. He tripped over a bullpen mound at Oracle Park, which at the time of the incident was actually on the field of play. It was with not back behind outside of where a player could get to it. It's since been reconfigured in the bullpen setup in San Francisco, but Williamson tripped over the mound, sustained a concussion, and he is suing the Giants. The 30-year-old most recently played in 2019 between the Giants and the Mariners. Finally, one other news item for you. This one just in today as I'm recording this. The Los Angeles Angels have hired Perry Minasian as the organization's next general manager, according to Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic. He spent the last 3 years working as an assistant GM for the Braves. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and shift gears now into our off-season previews. And for this segment, we're going to start with the AL East, and then we're going to do the NL East, and then coming up in future shows, we're going to get into the Central Divisions and the West Divisions. And the reason for this is I think it gives us a nice opportunity to reset and take a look at where things stand for every team here entering this offseason. What's their situation? What kind of season are they coming off of? How did that compare to the expectations we had for them? What moves have they made so far? What did they learn this past season? What are their key questions this offseason? What are their needs this offseason? So there's a lot of different things that we can discuss here. And so we're just going to go through the teams. I have a story up at 110sportsmedia.com right now for the AL East, NL East coming up on the website today as well. And we're just going to talk about these teams. We don't have time to get into, spend 20 minutes on the Orioles or anything like that, but just a quick hitting thing with a couple of thoughts on each of these clubs. Starting in the AL East, we're going to start with the Baltimore Orioles. I gave them a C+ for their 2020 performance, and in hindsight, maybe it should be a little bit higher than that. Keep in mind that the grades here, it's all relative to expectations. And the Orioles were projected for the worst record in baseball this year. But they were in the playoff race until the final weeks of the season. They struggled down the stretch, but they snapped a 3-year streak of last place finishes in the AL East. It was a productive. There were some things learned by the Orioles this year. They learned, for one, that Ryan Mountcastle could be a big cornerstone of the franchise for years to come. The 23-year-old hit .333 with 10 extra base hits in 35 games since he was called up this year. It looks like he could be a big bat for them for years to come. They have Jose Iglesias coming back after they exercised their option on him. Of course, he's this glove-first shortstop, but he actually had a great offensive season this past season. So they have him back in the fold. They have the second-rated prospect in Major League Baseball right now, according to MLB Pipeline. That's catcher Adley Rutschman, who he could be in the majors as soon as 2021. So that's something that they're looking forward to, and that's really going to mark when he gets promoted, the beginning of this next era for the Orioles. He could make the majors as soon as 2021, but a lot of it could depend on what the status is for the minor leagues this upcoming season. Another question for the Orioles, what are they going to do to build on the promising 2020 that they had? It was a positive season generally from them, but I don't expect to see a lot of trades and player ads of, big name free agents aren't going to be added by the Orioles. They're not at that point just yet. But they could be just a year or two away from being at that point where they're like, okay, let's bring in some veterans on these couple-year deals and start making things happen. They could be just a year or two away from that. We're gonna get a chance to see Trey Mancini back. He missed the season after as he was undergoing treatment for cancer, but he's apparently doing well now. Breakout outfielder Anthony Santander will get a chance to try to back up his performance. So really, it's just going to be interesting to see how they back up their promising 2020 season. As for their needs this offseason, again, like I said, I don't expect any big free agent ads, but they could use a veteran or two on a short-term deal for that rotation. So I wouldn't be surprised to see someone along the lines of Mike Minor or J.A. Happ, Drew Smyly, Gio Gonzalez, some proven veteran, not a star, on a 1-year deal, maybe a 2-year deal for some of those higher-end guys at a low cost. And they could make some trades if they think that they could get something from some of their more expensive proven players like the power hitting infielder Renato Nunez or Pedro Severino, the catcher. If they think it can get some attractive prospects from that, I wouldn't be surprised to see them swing those kind of deals as well, because they're always trying to add some prospects at this point in time. The Boston Red Sox are the next team up here. Wow, this was a bad season in 2020 for the Red Sox. I gave them a D minus for their 2020 performance. Chris Sale was out for the season, undergoing Tommy John. Mookie Betts, we know what happened to him, traded to Los Angeles. The Red Sox completely collapsed in 2020. They finished last in the AL East. The pitching staff had the third worst ERA in baseball. JD Martinez took a step back at the plate. Andrew Benintendi, basically a lost season for him. One positive, power hitting first base prospect Bobby Dalbec impressed down the stretch, 8 homers and 80 at bats for him. So, they learned this past season that they have to have more high quality pitching depth. Obviously you can't predict the kind of situations that happened with Sale and Eduardo Rodriguez, who contracted COVID-19 and then developed a heart condition. So you can't predict anything like that happening, of course, but the club was forced to turn to just so many inexperienced arms that were just not ready or not at a high enough level to be productive in the major leagues. Rodriguez's status for the beginning of the season isn't clear. Sale, like I just mentioned a few minutes ago, not going to be ready to go for the beginning of the year. So the Red Sox cannot enter 2021 without doing something to that rotation. Their big move this offseason so far, well, it was the rehiring of Alex Cora. We've already talked about that, so don't have time to get into all that. But it's going to be a smooth transition for him in that clubhouse. I'm confident in his return to that clubhouse, but there's a lot of needs for this Red Sox team. And some questions. And one of them is the front office going to be willing to spend? The whole part of the big deal with them trading Mookie Betts to the Dodgers was to try to get closer to the competitive balance tax threshold. They were trying to cut salary, trying to cut costs. Now their financial situation is more in order, so does that mean they want to keep it that way and not spend much? Or are they willing to make another big move? I don't know. I mean, they could go out and sign Trevor Bauer or George Springer, and it wouldn't shock me, but they could decide, hey, we don't want to spend that money and get back right where we were. There's also a question of who's going to handle center field for them. Jackie Bradley Jr. is a free agent. They could bring him back. Options after him are pretty thin if you're not signing George Springer. It's like Kevin Pillar, Michael Taylor, Gerard Dyson. It's not all that exciting. As far as their offseason needs, they need help at at starting pitcher, I should say. So even if they don't bring in one of the big guys, they could bring in a veteran like Charlie Morton or Jose Quintana or Corey Kluber, Garrett Richards, somebody to help try to stabilize that rotation. They also need help in the bullpen, and they could pursue a high-end option like Liam Hendricks or Brad Hand or Alex Colomé. And they need an answer at second base. Dustin Pedroia, it looks like he's not coming back. That era is ending. So maybe the big play, LeMahieu again, but there are cheaper options like Colton Wong and Tommy La Stella as well. Regardless, the Red Sox have some real needs this offseason. They've got a great core, but they've got some needs. They've got some things they need to fill, and it looks like they're going to have to do it externally for a lot of those situations. It's not going to be just internal solutions. The New York Yankees are next up here in the AL East. I gave them a C plus for their 2020 performance, which may seem harsh, but and of course, they had all these injuries, which made their path to the playoffs not very smooth, but they wouldn't have actually ended up in the postseason if not for the expanded format. Now, there's no question they were one of the best teams in the American League, but you can't just let them off the hook because they were one of the World Series favorites entering the season. And they were largely healthy entering the playoffs. They hit home runs, so many home runs in their playoff games, but then they were let down by their starting pitchers, not named Garrett Cole, in their loss to the Rays in the in the ALDS. And so the Yankees, the expectations are so high that I have to grade accordingly. So I gave them a C plus. Now, I think the big lesson the Yankees learned, they need more than just Garrett Cole come October. They need other proven high-end starters. They passed on an opportunity, I should say, to add starting pitching prior to the trade deadline. And now Masahiro Tanaka and J.A. Happ are free agents. They need help in the rotation. I would not be surprised at all to see them add some of those high-profile guys, whether it's a big splash like Bauer. There really is only is that one starter who's really the big splash in Bauer. Other than that, there's a lot of interesting arms in that next level, and I wouldn't be surprised to see the Yankees add multiple of them, such as maybe bringing back Masahiro Tanaka. As far as what they've done so far this offseason, they exercised their option for 2022 on Zach Britton, which seems weird, but they had to do that to guarantee he comes back this upcoming season. And he's been outstanding for them. The big question for the Yankees this offseason, it's very clear, will they bring back DJ LeMahieu? They had a 2-year, $24 million contract with him. It was an absolute steal. He won a Silver Slugger in 2019, and he was even better this past year. He won a second career batting title with a career-high OPS in 2020. He's expressed interest in remaining in New York. They clearly would love to have him back, but maybe they decide that it doesn't work out because of either A, maybe they want to put their money in starting pitcher and getting starters instead, or B, maybe they feel the need to move Gleyber Torres off of shortstop, in which case it'd be hard to bring LeMahieu back. Maybe they try to sign or acquire a shortstop instead, and that would leave little room for LeMahieu. So that's the big question for the Yankees. Will they bring back DJ LeMahieu? Another question, will Gary Sanchez remain the starting catcher? General manager Brian Cashman said that was a fair question. And Kyle Higashioka started 5 of the team's 7 postseason games. Sanchez is the best power-hitting catcher in baseball, but he really struggled this year. He's hit for a low average, and it's continued to sink lower and lower in recent years, honestly, with a few exceptions. And they could easily turn to him again. The upside is huge, but they could also factor into the JT Realmuto sweepstakes or get creative as well. Their offseason needs, in addition to figuring out the catcher position, they need to bring in some sort of starter. We've already talked about this, and figure out what's happening in the middle infield if they don't bring back DJ LeMahieu. The Tampa Bay Rays, the 4th team in the AL East to discuss, they got an A+ in my grades for this season. This is a story I published last week on the website. And they got an A+ because, of course, they got an A+. They won the AL pennant. They used their depth, their defense, their strong pitching, their formula to post the best record in the AL, win their first division title since 2010, reach the World Series for the first time since 2008. And yes, it ended badly, but look, I mean, they fell to the best team in baseball. They were incredible in 2020. And, the lesson for them is that their approach can work at a really high level, and it did in 2020. There's not much else to say. Other than that, we've talked about the Rays a lot. So far this offseason, they made a couple of interesting moves in guys that they did not bring back. They declined their options on Charlie Morton and catcher Mike Zunino. And so the key questions for them, well, they relate to those two guys and those two positions. One, will Charlie Morton come back? They declined his option, which was $15 million. And they say they want to bring him back, but it appears they're not willing to maybe go any higher than $10 million for Morton. And I have to think there's going to be some club that's going to be willing to give him more for just a 1-year deal because of his upside. And if they don't bring him back, they probably, even though they have a great foundation for a rotation, if they don't bring him back, I think they'll probably try to sign some sort of cheaper mid-tier starter to add some stability to that rotation. And then there's the question for them of who's behind the plate. They literally have no catchers anymore. That Michael Perez, their backup, is gone. He was claimed by Pittsburgh. Zunino is gone now. Oh, he's a free agent. They could bring him back, but if they don't, they're going to have to turn to somebody else, probably on the free agent market, because the only guy on their depth chart right now is a prospect who hasn't played above A-ball. So they're going to have to figure something out there. So their off-season needs, they need a catcher. They're going to probably look for something at starting pitcher. Maybe it's like a veteran like Cole Hamels, John Lester, or Mike Minor for a low cost. If it's a lower cost for, they're more comfortable paying that kind of cost than, $15 million for Charlie Morton. A final team to talk about here in the AL East is the Toronto Blue Jays. They're a young team that I gave an A for their 2020 performance. They took a significant step forward this season, despite the fact that they were not playing at all in their home ballpark due to COVID-19 travel restrictions. They couldn't play in Toronto. They worked pretty hard. They were able to piece together a serviceable rotation behind Hyunjin Ryu, I should say. And they got a breakout year from Teoscar Hernandez and strong showings from Rowdy Tellez, I should say, Lourdes Gurriel Jr., Randall Grichuk. There's a lot of exciting offensive young pieces for this team. They finished above 500 for the first time and made the playoffs for the first time since 2016. They ended up getting swept by the eventual AL champion Rays in the wild card series. There's a couple of key areas for the Blue Jays that if they address, they could help this young core take another step forward. They have the foundation from Hernandez and Gurriel Jr., Bo Bichette, Cavan Biggio, Vladimir Guerrero, so much young talent. But they need to improve in some areas. They need to do a better job of throwing strikes. They need to put together a better defense. Their big move this offseason so far has been a 1-year, $8 million deal with lefty Robbie Ray, which in some ways is odd because he's not exactly helping their problem with throwing strikes. He led the National League in walks in 2020 despite getting traded to the American League at the trade deadline. So that's not exactly helping that problem. But the Blue Jays have some questions about will Vladimir Guerrero take another step forward. It's easy to forget he's just 21 years old still, and we've kind of come to expect these great things from these young stars because of what we've seen from Juan Soto and Fernando Tatis Jr., but there's still time for Gurriel, even though he's been good but not great his first few seasons in the majors. Will they add another high-end starter behind Ryu? That's one thing that I'm really looking for them to see if they're willing to do, because that's one thing that can take them another step forward in matching up better in a potential playoff series. Ryu is great, but right now Nate Pearson looks like their number 2 starter, and he made his major league debut this past season, and he had some struggles. He's confident, there's no reason to panic with him. He's a high prospect, but they need somebody else, I really believe, in that rotation behind Ryu they can depend on. And also they need something at third base now because they're going to want to upgrade from Travis Shaw, who struggled in 2020. So DJ LeMahieu would be the big play. Justin Turner, another option if he doesn't return to the Dodgers. We'll see what they do, but they're going to do something, I'm confident, in the infield, probably, to address third base in particular. And that is a look at our AL East preview. We're going to take another quick break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about the NL East. We're going to go through the NL East, not off-season preview. That's coming up next year on Around the Bases from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back into Around the Bases from 110 Sports. We're going to jump right into our NL East off-season preview, and we're going to start with the Atlanta Braves, who I gave an A for their 2020 performance. They had an offense that was one of the best in baseball. They finished top 2 in OPS, runs scored, and home runs. They had 4 Silver Slugger winners. The Braves won the NL East for a third straight season. Max Fried and Ian Anderson, the rookie, formed a nearly unstoppable top-of-the-rotation duo in the playoffs, and they helped power Atlanta on a deep postseason run before they eventually blew a 3-1 series lead to the Dodgers in the NLCS. As for the big lesson that the Braves learned in 2020, they learned that they have three of baseball's top young starting pitchers. Of course, we saw an incredible offense from the Braves this past season. Marcell Ozuna, Dansby Swanson, Travis d'Arnaud, they all exceeded expectations, and they got good contributions from Freeman and and all these other Acuna and all these other key players. But the bigger discovery for the Braves was on the mound because Mike Soroka went down with a torn Achilles early in the season, and then Max Fried stepped up as the team's ace in his absence, and then Ian Anderson was incredible with it breaking out in the postseason with a 0.96 ERA in almost 20 innings. And then Soroka is expected back now for the Braves early in the 2021 season. So we have Soroka, you have Fried, you have Anderson. That's a great, great top three. And that's the big discovery that the Braves have from this past season. It's really exciting time for them in that area. As for their offseason so far, they declined a $3.25 million option on right-hander Darren O'Day, and they signed a veteran outfielder Abraham Almonte to a one-year contract. The key questions for the Braves this offseason, the big one, will they bring back Marcell Ozuna? He had his market sort of diminished last winter after the Cardinals extended a qualifying offer to him, and he had two good but not great seasons. So he ended up taking a one-year, $18 million contract with Atlanta, and that was the steal of this past offseason. Ozuna nearly won the Triple Crown. He led the NL in home runs and RBI and total bases. He played in every one of the Braves games, the majority of them DHing, and he was just incredible. There's a question for the Braves now. There's still uncertainty. It's not set in stone about the future of the DH in the National League moving forward. Ozuna can play in the outfield, but he's not a plus defender. He's a negative defender out there in left field. So it's an interesting factor to consider in all this. The Braves would, of course, love to have that big bat back in the lineup. So we'll see what they do. If they don't bring him back, I think they could turn to the free agent market or maybe the trade market to acquire a big bat that can play left field that way. As for who fills out the rotation, that's another key question for them. Of course, we just talked about how they have a great core. Three, it looks like, a young core of three starters. But I think that they could they could end up. There's uncertainty after those three in terms of players who they can really count on. So I think they could easily try to make a one-year deal with a veteran like Charlie Morton, John Lester, Adam Wainwright, something like that. And if they don't bring back Ozuna, I predicted that they would sign George Springer to a 5-year, $110 million contract. That was my prediction I made in my free agent rankings with predictions story. Price could be out of their comfort zone. Maybe they turn to like Michael Brantley or Jock Peterson or trade for Chris Bryant. That's an idea I've seen out there. So we'll see. But I think if the Braves don't bring back Ozuna, they'll do something to add a proven outfielder this offseason. The Miami Marlins, the next team to discuss here, they got an A+. We talked about the Marlins earlier in the show with Don Mattingly, so I don't need to get into it a lot. They overcame a COVID-19 outbreak. 60 players used in a 60-game season, an incredible performance for them relative to, even though they got swept by the Cubs they swept the Cubs, and then they got swept by the Braves in the NLDS. Like, it doesn't matter. Just making the postseason after everything that they've been through and what our expectations were for them, it was an outstanding season for them. The big lesson learned is that they have a foundation set for some sustainable success. They have a third baseman in Brian Anderson with all-star potential. They've got some prospects on the way up. They've got a young group of starting pitchers, Pablo Lopez, Sandy Alcantara, Sixto Sanchez, who showed that the rotation actually has the ability to be one of the best in the National League. So the future's looking bright for Miami. They parted ways with, as far as offseason moves, they parted ways with their president of baseball operations, Michael Hill, after they couldn't agree to a new contract. So they're looking for a new president of baseball ops. They also picked up the $12.5 million option on outfielder Starling Marte, who they acquired from the Diamondbacks before the trade deadline. So as for their key questions, they need someone new calling the shots in the front office with Michael Hill gone now. There's also questions about the right side of their infield. Isan Diaz, or do they go John Birdie at second base? They've got an infield prospect, Jazz Chisholm. He could get a shot there. And they've got Garrett Cooper and Jesus Aguilar, who factor in at first base. They both were good, not great, in 2020. and it's the question about whether they have the DH could factor into things there. So they have to figure that out. They look like they could be interested in acquiring a catcher because it looks like Jorge Alfaro just really isn't working out. So maybe they turn to the free agent market, James McCann, Mike Zunino, something like that. And they need a closer after they didn't pick up Brandon Kinsler's option. So wouldn't be surprised to see them sign a veteran to a short-term deal, a one-year deal, something like that. The New York Mets, we talked about the Mets as well in context of the Steve Cohen as the new owner of the Mets. They had a great offensive performance actually in 2020. It was a good offense. They finished in the top 5 in home runs, OPS, and batting average in the NL. They just couldn't capitalize with runners in scoring position and non-Jacob deGrom starters, a 6.33 ERA. So in the end, another disappointing season. They learned they need other guys. They cannot just, it doesn't matter how good Jacob deGrom is if you don't have support behind him. And now they're going to have Marcus Stroman back and Noah Syndergaard hopefully back at some point early-ish to mid-season in 2021. We'll see what else they do. Their big move of the offseason is Steve Cohen, of course. We're not going to get into that again. And Marcus Stroman coming back. Questions, as I mentioned before, questions for the Mets. How much of a splash does Cohen make out of the gate? And will Luis Rojas indeed return as manager? So gotten into both of these topics already. But those are their key questions. And do they still add another starting pitcher? I think they should. Just how high end will they go, though, now that they have Marcus Stroman back in the fold? And the one thing we know they're going to do, they need a catcher because they declined their contract options on Wilson Ramos and Robinson Chirinos. They've been tied, or not. I don't know about connected to in terms of interest, but connected to in terms of making sense with JT Realmuto. So we'll see if maybe they try to make a splash there. And that's the Mets. The Philadelphia Phillies, the fourth team I want to discuss here in the National League East, which makes sense because we just talked about JT Realmuto, and that's one of the defining questions of their offseason. But first, look back. Extremely disappointing 2020 season for the Phillies, who I ended up giving a D-. There's a great core from Realmuto, who is, of course, now free agent, Bryce Harper, Aaron Nola, Zach Wheeler, but their bullpen was the second worst in MLB history in terms of ERA. It was horrible. They finished third in the NL East, missed the playoffs for a 9th straight year. They learned that their quantity over quality approach to the bullpen just doesn't work. They acquired 4 pitchers at the trade deadline, but none of them was high-end enough, and they all ended up struggling for the most part or getting hurt. The Phillies are going to have to do a better job of developing pitchers in addition to making some, I think, a big signing or two among some of the top relievers. They extended their qualifying offer to Realmuto. That was declined, and a lot of their bullpen is now gone. A lot of those struggling pitchers for them this past season are now free agents. So they're going to need to address the bullpen. I would see it making sense for them to add multiple high-end guys like Liam Hendricks, Trevor May, Blake Trinan, Kirby Yates, something like that. They also may need to add a starting pitcher. They have a good core with Nola, Wheeler, and Zach Eflin, but maybe they add a mid-tier option. And the big question for them, will JT Realmuto return? Bryce Harper wants him back. The Phillies want him back. JT Realmuto, it seems like, would welcome that, but I don't know if they're going to be willing to pay him what he's going to demand. We shall see. And if they don't, not only are they going to have to address the catcher position, but the bigger thing is how are they going to make themselves better if they're losing the best catcher in baseball after a highly disappointing season? So, well, there's a lot of pressure on the Phillies right now, and we'll see how that all plays out. Final NL East team I want to discuss is the Washington Nationals. I gave them a D grade for their 2020 performance. It was an interesting situation because they actually posted an identical record through 50 games this year as they did last year. That record was 19-31, though, and they went on this incredible run in 2019 the rest of the way and then made the playoffs just barely and then went on this incredible run. But there's no time for that in a 60-game season. Anthony Rendon was gone. Steven Strasburg had to have carpal tunnels surgery for carpal tunnel syndrome. And Patrick Corbin completely fell apart. And Max Scherzer took a little bit of a step back. And the big lesson learned for them is that it's a risky approach to be so dependent on a few star players. They had a very top-heavy roster. And Max Scherzer couldn't hold together the entire pitching staff when Corbin fell apart and Strasburg went down. Juan Soto and Trey Turner, outstanding, but they can't hold together an entire offense when there's no other proven stars or proven high-level players in that lineup besides them. They re-signed utility man Josh Harrison to a one-year, $1 million contract and declined their options on Howie Kendrick, Eric Thames, Adam Eaton, and Anibal Sanchez. The key questions for them and the offseason needs, well, there's some holes for them, but the question is, what does the future of this team look like? They kind of ran back the clock last year after their World Series win and said, okay, we'll bring back everybody, with the exception of Rendon. They brought most everybody back, and it didn't work. And now most of those guys, Kendrick and Eaton, Asdrubal Cabrera, Ryan Zimmerman, Sean Doolittle, they're all free agents. This team is kind of at a crossroads. How much do they have a foundation that's good, but they're going to need to do something, and just simply bringing back most of those guys doesn't seem like that's going to be the solution. So they're going to need to figure out what they're going to do to add some help in the outfield, because they got Juan Soto and Victor Robles, who really, really struggled last year offensively, and then that's it. Soto is absolutely outstanding, of course. But there's holes out there now with Eaton gone. They need a first baseman because the depth chart on their website doesn't even include a first baseman. They got nobody on their roster right now to play first base. So they're going to need to do something there. So how high are they going to swing? Are they going to bring in a big George Springer, Marcell Ozuna type? Or do they go grab a Mitch Moreland to play first base? There's also questions about Steven Strasburg. Will he fully be healthy to begin 2021? It's a procedure that he had that has a relatively limited history among major leaguers, so it's unclear exactly how we can predict how that'll play out. So there's a lot of questions for this Nationals team. There's a lot of questions for a lot of these NL East teams. From the Phillies to the Nationals, there's a lot of pressure. The Mets as well, but there's certainly optimism right there right now. So yeah, the Braves are certainly in a good position as far as organizationally. They got the big question of Ozuna, but that's a team with a lot fewer questions and a lot less pressure than some of these other clubs like the Nationals and the Phillies. Okay, we're going to take one final break here today on the show. When we come back, just a quick just a little bit of time left for what's on deck. That's coming up next here on Around the Bases from 110 Sports. Welcome back one final time to this Thursday, November 12th edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports. Just a few minutes left for what's on deck, and just a few things to tell you about. The Rookie of the Year, of course, was announced on Monday. Manager of the Year awards announced Tuesday, and Cy Young last night, which means it all wraps up tonight with the unveiling of the MVP awards. In the AL, it's Jose Abreu, DJ LeMahieu, and Jose Ramirez who are the finalists. My prediction is that it'll go to Jose Abreu, but all three are fine choices. I think it'll go to Abreu, the White Sox first baseman. And the National League, the three finalists are Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, and Manny Machado. And my prediction here is that it'll go to Freddie Freeman. I think just the season that he had overall was outstanding. I think it was the best. I think he is the MVP. I just think he had the best season. Overall, Mookie Betts would be a fine choice. Machado would surprise me. A great bounce back season for Machado. But I think it's going to be Freeman or Betts, and who I think it should be is Freeman, the Braves' first baseman. Finally, on Monday, what's also on deck, on Monday, prior to our next broadcast of Around the Bases, the 2021 Hall of Fame ballot will be released. Again, just the ballot. The voting results will be a little ways in the future. This is year 9 of 10 on the ballot for players like Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, and Curt Schilling. So we'll see how that plays out, if any of them, gets the percentage needed to be elected into the Hall of Fame. It's a down year for first-timers on the ballot. The headliners are Mark Burley and Torrey Hunter. No disrespect to either of them, but they're not quite at the level of what you might expect to see in Hall of Fame classes. Not saying that either of them, no disrespect to either a Burley or Hunter with great careers, but it's a bit of a down year for first timers in terms of Hall of Fame, in terms of players entering candidacy for the Hall of Fame. And that's what's on deck. Coming up on our show on Tuesday, we will talk about the latest headlines from over the weekend, and then next week, either Tuesday or Thursday, we'll begin talking. Most likely Thursday, we will begin talking, doing our preview of, like we did today, for the Central divisions, the AL Central and NL Central. Possible we start that as soon as Tuesday, but I imagine we'll have enough other storylines and headlines from the next 4 or 5 days to talk about by then. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Around the Bases here from 110 Sports. A reminder that our coverage continues with the J-Mole Show with Josh Molnix on Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. I'm sure he's going to be talking about the latest from the Masters. And Josh Doring is back with Touchline Talk. A lot going on in the soccer world right now. So he'll be here to break that down live on Thursday at 11. I'm forgetting my days. Josh Molnitz will be back tomorrow on Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern with his show. Josh Doran will be back with Touchline Talk on Tuesday, as I will be also as well with Around the Bases on Tuesday as well on Tuesday afternoon. But that's going to do it for this edition of Around the Bases. Make sure to go to 110sportsmedia.com for our latest coverage and to subscribe to our newsletter, listen to our podcasts, our shows on demand, and read the latest written content. Thanks so much for watching Around the Bases, and I'll talk to you again next week.